Hello and welcome. You are listening to Pint Size Therapy, where we explore all things related to mental health healing, personal growth and development, emotional wellness, and the human experience in pint sized bites. I'm your host, Dr. Aletha Clark, a licensed psychotherapist, certified hypnotherapist, and master addiction counselor, and I am happy to have you here with me today as you embark on your mental wellness journey. While I appreciate you tuning in, don't forget this podcast is informational only and is not a substitute for seeking out your own mental health counseling with a licensed professional. So join me as we jump into today's episode. Hello and welcome to another episode of Pint Size Therapy. Today we're diving into another challenging but crucial topic, toxic relationships. Relationships play a major role in shaping our emotional and psychological well-being. But what happens when those relationships turn toxic? In this episode, we'll discuss the characteristics of toxic relationships, how to recognize toxic behavior, the impact staying in these relationships can have, and finally, strategies to help you break free. So whether you're in a toxic relationship or supporting someone who is, I hope this episode provides clarity and guidance. So, a toxic relationship is any relationship where there's a consistent pattern of unhealthy, harmful behaviors. These relationships can occur in romantic partnerships, but they also show up in friendships, family dynamics, or even work settings. Toxicity in a relationship doesn't always mean that the person is bad or evil, but the dynamic between both individuals becomes harmful over time. So let's talk about some characteristics of toxic relationships. Oftentimes when we think about toxic relationships, we definitely will see a lack of trust or consistent dishonesty, power imbalances where one person always holds control over the relationship, constant criticism or belittling, emotional manipulation. Sometimes we'll see like playing mind games or gaslighting. You can feel really drained or anxious, like you're walking on eggshells around the other person. A lack of support where the relationship feels one-sided. Even patterns of abuse, whether emotional, verbal, physical, or even financial. It's important to remember that toxic relationships can sneak up on us. Many of them don't start off obviously unhealthy. In fact, they often begin with what seems like deep affection, charm, and intense connection. This intensity can feel flattering at first, but it can mask deeper patterns of control, insecurity, and even manipulation. In friendships, toxic dynamics may begin with someone who seems incredibly supportive or fun, but over time, you start to recognize their neediness, competitiveness, or emotional volatility. It starts to kind of drain on you. In family relationships, toxic patterns are often normalized early in life, making it harder to recognize the dysfunction when you're older. In romantic relationships, most toxic dynamics don't start with big red flags waving in the wind. Instead, they often begin with something that feels incredibly romantic. You might think you've found someone who's finally treating you right, someone who's deeply invested in you, and that's where the trap can begin. One of the most common early signs is something called love bombing. This happens when someone overwhelms you with excessive attention, flattery, gifts, constant communication, and promises of a future together very early on in the relationship. It can feel like a fairy tale. They say all the right things, seem to understand you completely, and make you feel like you're the most important person in the world. The intensity can be intoxicating. But love bombing isn't love. It's control disguised as affection. It's a manipulation tactic used to quickly gain your trust and emotional dependence, so that later, when the unhealthy behaviors begin, like jealousy, control, criticism, or gaslighting, you're already emotionally invested and less likely to leave. This is how toxicity sneaks in. At first, the relationship might feel exciting, even magical. You justify the intensity by saying, "We just have a strong connection," or "They're just really passionate." But over time, things kind of shift. That partner who once texted you good morning every day now uses communication as a weapon, ignoring you for hours, demanding constant updates about where you are or who you're with, or even accusing you of things you haven't done. They may start to isolate you from friends and family, making subtle remarks like, "They don't really support us," or "Why do you need to talk to them when you have me?" The charm wears off and the control becomes clearer. But by then, you might feel too confused, too hopeful things will return to how they once were, or too afraid to leave. It's especially tricky because these behaviors often escalate gradually. They don't go from 0 to 100 overnight. It starts with a comment here, a moment of jealousy there, a small boundary crossed, and before you know it, you're in a relationship that feels more like a power struggle than a partnership. Because of this gradual buildup, many people in toxic relationships question themselves before they ever question the other person. You might hear yourself saying things like, "Maybe I'm overreacting," or "They didn't mean it like that," or even "It wasn't always like this." And those thoughts keep you in a cycle of self doubt and emotional confusion. That's the trap. The toxicity often grows slowly and subtly until one day you're looking at a relationship that makes you feel more hurt than healed, more anxious than at peace. So if you're finding it difficult to name the relationship as toxic, that's okay. You're not alone. And just acknowledging that something feels off is kind of a beginning to some clarity. So now that we've talked about what toxic relationships look like and how they can sneak up on us, let's kind of explore something deeper and often overlooked. Why do we fall into these relationships in the first place? So, first, I want to say this clearly. Falling into a toxic relationship is not a reflection of your worth or intelligence. Toxic relationships don't only affect people who are insecure or inexperienced, they can impact anyone because the dynamics that pull us in are often tied to our subconscious emotional needs and unresolved wounds. So let's kind of break this down. Let's look at an unresolved, childhood experiences, for example. Many of us are drawn to what's familiar, not necessarily what's healthy. So if you grew up in a household where love was conditional, where boundaries were they weren't respected, or where emotional unpredictability was normal, you may have learned to tolerate or even expect dysfunction. You might confuse intensity with love. You may find yourself replicating old relational patterns, not because you want to, but because part of you is trying to fix what was broken in the past. It's familiar to you. You know, Sometimes reasons why we might stay or why we might get into some of these toxic relationships is because of, our low self-worth or even trauma bonds. If you struggle with self-esteem or carry trauma, you may unconsciously believe that you don't deserve better. Toxic individuals often reinforce these beliefs by chipping away at your confidence. This creates a cycle known as trauma bond, whether intermittent kindness, apologies, or affection mixed with harm creates an emotional roller coaster that keeps you hooked, even when you know the relationship isn't good for you. Other times, we can feel a little bit of a hope for change. People in toxic relationships often hold on to the potential of who the person could be, not who they consistently are. We are often hopeful that who they showed us in the beginning is truly who they are and who they can get back to. This idealization, paired with the occasional moments of tenderness, creates that false hope. You may keep thinking, if I just love them harder or if I just communicate better, things will go back to how they were at the beginning. Unfortunately, the truth is, the beginning was often a carefully curated act. It was a mask they wore to hide their true selves, especially in cases involving manipulation or narcissistic traits. Sometimes we also have a fear of being alone. Let's be honest, many of us stay because we fear the loneliness, the judgment, or the unknown that comes with leaving. Society often places a high value on being in a relationship, so even unhealthy ones can feel better than nothing. But staying in a relationship out of fear isn't love, it's usually survival. One of the last reasons, maybe, why we might get into toxic relationships is our role of empathy or overfunctioning. Highly empathic people, helpers, caregivers, and people who struggle with codependency often fall into toxic dynamics because they see someone's pain and they want to fix it. You may feel responsible for the other person's emotional well being. You may downplay your own needs to keep the peace. We have to remember that you're not responsible for fixing, saving, or rescuing other people. Relationships, they should be reciprocal, not one sided, and definitely not a one sided emotional labor. So the bottom line is that falling into a toxic relationship doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. It often means your inner wounds, maybe your unmet needs, or past experiences are guiding your relationship choices in ways you haven't fully seen yet. And once you gain that insight, you can begin to write the story, reclaiming kind of what love, respect, and safety truly look like for you. Often, individuals who are toxic in these relationships, they recognize that this person might have some unmet needs or some inner wounds. And they feed off of that, right? They exploit some of those vulnerabilities. So let's kind of recognize toxic behaviors. It's often the first step toward understanding the state of a relationship. There are some common toxic traits that show up in toxic relationships. Let's reflect on your own kind of relationship history, whether it's friendships, family, or even romantic partners, as we look at some of these red flags of toxicity. So, first, let's start with control. Does the other person attempt to control your decisions, your activities, or who you spend time with? Toxic individuals often seek to limit your independence. They want to keep tabs on your whereabouts, control who you hang out with, where you go, or monitor your calls and text messages. A person engaging in controlling behavior may come up with unfounded reasons why they do not like a specific friend of yours, make you feel guilty for wanting to hang out with them, cause problems, or even start arguments whenever you are with them. They find ways to kind of sabotage, those times that you have alone with them. Gaslighting is another, toxic trait, right? This is where the person makes you question your own reality. You might hear phrases like, "you're too sensitive," or "that never happened." They will lie and deny what you know is true and actually make you start doubting yourself. You start questioning yourself and feel like, okay, am I losing it? Because I really felt that this happened and this was true. Jealousy and possessiveness, while that can be, somewhat normal at times, right? Toxic jealousy leads to controlling behaviors and mistrust. Jealousy is rooted in insecurities and can show up in your partner's inability to celebrate your victories by dismissing or minimizing it. Jealousy can also show up as possessiveness when they are obsessively calling or texting you throughout the day or requiring you to check in when you are away from them. They make you ditch your plans and friends for them, right? Or they can be overly suspicious and accuse you of being too friendly, too flirty, or being unfaithful. Jealousy can show up even in friendships, right? When they're not willing to kind of root you on and be a cheerleader for you, right? They make your accomplishments feel very insignificant, or they turn it on themselves and try to overshadow your achievements by highlighting maybe some of theirs. Blame shifting in a toxic relationship is when the person may never take responsibility for their actions and instead blame you for everything wrong. They never look at their own behaviors and actions and hold you responsible for all of the discord in the relationship. Another thing is isolation. Toxic individuals often isolate their partners or friends from loved ones, creating a sense of dependency. Sometimes they can feel very subtle at first, but eventually you realize you have not been around your friends or families for months. It's easy to dismiss one or two instances of these behaviors, but when they become a pattern, it's time to reflect on the health of the relationship. So let's kind of look at the impact of staying in a toxic relationship. We understand that toxic relationships are unhealthy for the relationship, but staying in a toxic relationship can have long lasting effects and implications on your emotional and psychological health. Over time, these relationships can lead to anxiety, depression, and even trauma. You may start to doubt yourself, lose confidence, and feel like you're constantly in survival mode. It's important to note that toxic relationships don't just affect your mental health, they can actually impact your physical health as well. We know that chronic stress, from toxic interactions can lead to insomnia, to headaches, digestive issues, and even a weakened immune system. Toxic relationships also stifle your personal growth. When you're constantly dealing with negativity or manipulation, it becomes difficult to pursue your own goals, your own dreams, and even hobbies. You're often focused on managing the relationship rather than nurturing your own well being. You sometimes will feel very unmotivated or fatigued, and are filled with doubts that discourage you from your own personal goals, your own personal growth and development. So, before we move into how to end a toxic relationship, I want to take a moment to shift the focus toward what healthy relationships actually look and feel like. Because sometimes when all you've known is dysfunction or inconsistency, even healthy behaviors can feel kind of unfamiliar or uncomfortable at first. So, let's kind of clarify what we are aiming for in a healthy relationship. To start off, we're looking for mutual respect and equality. In a healthy relationship, both people feel seen, heard, and valued. There's no power imbalance where one person dominates the other. Each person's time, opinions, and boundaries are respected. You don't have to fight to be heard, you're already being listened to. You also feel a sense of safety, right? You feel safe being yourself without fear of punishment or ridicule. You can express your emotions without being gaslighted, blamed, or dismissed. Healthy relationships create space for vulnerability and honest communication, even when it's uncomfortable. You feel in a safe and trusting relationship that you can show up fully as you are. In a supportive connection, boundaries are not only accepted, they're respected. A healthy partner or friend doesn't get defensive when you express a need or ask for space. Instead, they honor it, even if they don't fully understand it. Healthy relationships also are built on clear, compassionate dialogue. You're allowed to say, "That hurt me," or "I need something different," without fear that you're going to be punished for it. Conflict isn't avoided, it's navigated with care, even when it's difficult. There's a natural give and take in healthy relationships. You're not the only one making the effort, apologizing constantly, or even always having to be the one to compromise. Both people invest in the connection and want to see each other grow, not just together, but also as individuals. Healthy relationships support your individuality. You're free to have your own friends, your own interests, and your own space. The connection is rooted in trust, not guilt, not control, not jealousy. They want you to thrive. They want you to do well. They want you to work towards your goals and reach them and grow as a better person. Overall, a healthy relationship feels peaceful, not chaotic. It feels grounded, not draining. It feels supportive and not suffocating. It feels empowering and not diminishing. If these qualities feel foreign to you, that's okay. This is where your healing begins. You're not asking for too much. You're learning to ask for what's emotionally safe and sustainable. And we can let this list kind of be a compass for us. So, as you have reflected on your relationships, You might realize that gut feeling you had all along is indeed indicators of a toxic relationship. So, now what do we do about it? So, first, step one is acknowledging the problem. Well, you've already taken the first and most important step in ending a toxic relationship by recognizing that it actually exists. It can be hard to admit that someone you care about is causing you harm, but acknowledgement is key to moving forward. Step two is setting boundaries. Once you acknowledge the toxicity, begin by setting clear boundaries. Be firm and consistent about what behaviors are unacceptable. Sometimes this can change the dynamic in a relationship. But if we are being honest, in many cases, toxic individuals won't respect boundaries. Step three is seeking support. Ending a toxic relationship can be incredibly difficult, especially if the person has been a large part of your life. Seek support from trusted friends and family, or a therapist who can offer guidance and help you stay grounded in your decision. Step four is planning your exit. If you decided that the relationship needs to end, it's crucial to create an exit strategy. This might mean saving money if you live with the person, arranging alternative living arrangements, or finding professional support if there's a risk of escalation. And step five is either adapting a no contact or limited contact. One of the most effective strategies to truly break free from a toxic relationship is to go no contact, or in cases where no contact isn't possible, to do your best to limit the interaction to the bare minimum. This gives you the space to heal and regain your sense of self. So, as we wrap up today's episode, I want to remind you that it's okay to prioritize your well being. Ending a toxic relationship is never easy, but it is a powerful step towards reclaiming your life, your confidence, and your emotional health. So, if you're struggling to navigate a toxic relationship, you don't have to do it alone. Reach out to a trusted therapist or counselor who can support you through this process. Remember, you deserve relationships that nurture and uplift you. As always, thank you for joining me today on Pint Size Therapy. If you found this conversation meaningful, I invite you to leave me a comment, like, subscribe, and share with your family and friends. Come visit my website at pintsizedtherapy.com, where you will find resources to accompany our various discussions and encourage you to continue your wellness journey. Once again, I am Dr. Aletha Clark. Until next time, remember to protect your peace and take care of your mental health.